Men speak of love as if they understand it. They chase women as if it were a mission from the gods. But what if everything they believe about women, about love, about desire, is built on a lie? Plato never gave lectures on romance. He never handed out tips on how to attract a woman. What he gave us was far more dangerous. He revealed the blueprint of the human soul. And in that revelation, he warned us. The greatest danger a man will ever face is not war, not politics, not poverty. It is the ungoverned self and the illusions that take root within it. But let's be clear. Plato didn't say women are the enemy. He said your interpretation of them can be. Woman, to the undisciplined man, becomes not a person, but a projection, a tool used by his lower self to feed his cravings. And this is the beginning of spiritual slavery. You don't see her, you see what you want to see. Her smile becomes a promise. Her attention becomes a reward. Her rejection becomes your reason to crumble. And all the while, Plato would remind you, a man who cannot control his own soul cannot see clearly. So, why is this dangerous? Because you hand over your mind before you even speak a word. You give away your power before you know her name, not because she took it, but because you never learned how to keep it. Plato said, the worst of all deceptions is self-deception. And yet, this is the prison most men live in. You see her? She smiles. Your heart stirs. You call it fate. She laughs. You feel seen. You call it connection. But what if none of it is real? What if what you're feeling is not her, but a reflection of your own unmet needs, your undisciplined emotions? Plato warned us that the mind, when left untrained, becomes the easiest prey for manipulation, not by others, but by itself. It projects meaning onto meaningless things. It turns symbols into gods. It creates fantasy, then suffers when that fantasy breaks. And so men walk into relationships like dreamers walking into a storm, not awake, not aware, but desperate to be filled. You think you love her, but what you actually love is what she represents to you. Comfort, validation, worthiness. You place your happiness in her hands, thinking she will complete you. But Plato's teachings cut through that illusion like a sword. The soul that depends on another to feel whole is not a soul at peace, it is a soul in chains. And the chains are emotional. You crave her attention because you have not faced your solitude. You crave her approval because you've never approved of yourself. You crave her body because you have no discipline over your own desires. Plato wrote that the just man does not allow the lustful part of his soul to dominate him. Yet that is exactly what most men do. They call it passion. They call it romance. But it's slavery. And what's worse, they wear their chains proudly. Until you see this, you will keep mistaking emotional dependency for love. And every time you do, you will fall deeper into illusion, into the very shadow Plato warned us to escape. To Plato, love was never simple. He called it divine madness, a force that pulls the soul from its center and drags it into chaos. But the chaos he knew was not caused by the beloved. It was caused by the soul that lacks order. This is where most men go blind. They look at a woman and believe she holds the power, that she's the reason for their turmoil, that she bewitched them, distracted them, destroyed them. But Plato would whisper a harsher truth. She's only the mirror. She reflects the war already raging inside you. She doesn't need to be cunning. She doesn't need to manipulate. All she has to do is exist, and the weakness in you does the rest. If your soul is untrained, her beauty will control you. If your mind is undisciplined, her words will move you. If your ego is fragile, her rejection will destroy you. And in all of this, you remain unaware, blaming her, chasing her, resenting her, needing her. But Plato's philosophy was built on clarity, and clarity demands that you turn inward. You must ask, Why do I crave this woman's validation? Why does her silence make me panic? Why does her presence feel like purpose? The answer, Plato would say, is that you have yet to master yourself. A man who governs his soul sees through the illusion. He no longer sees a goddess nor a demon. He sees a reflection, a chance to test his strength, not surrender it. Until you become that man, every woman will feel like a mystery. Not because she is, but because you are still a mystery to yourself. In Phaedrus, Plato describes the soul as a chariot drawn by two horses. One is noble, disciplined, and guided by reason. The other is wild, untamed, and addicted to desire. And the man, the charioteer, must learn to control both, or be destroyed by their pull. This is not just poetic metaphor. It's a psychological map. Because every time a woman enters your life, the wild horse wakes. It doesn't whisper, it roars. It pulls toward pleasure, toward fantasy, toward obsession. It drags the man not toward love, but toward madness disguised as love. You think you're choosing her, but what's really happening is this: the wild horse is choosing for you. Plato warned that most men fail, not because they lack strength, but because they never learned how to direct it. They allow appetite, not reason, to lead their lives. And when appetite leads, the destination is always the same: regret, confusion, collapse. Think about it. How many men throw away their purpose for a woman's approval? How many compromise their principles for a moment of pleasure? How many call it love when it's simply weakness wearing a mask? You see, the wild horse doesn't care about truth. It cares about sensation. It doesn't seek meaning. It seeks escape. And the woman becomes that escape, that dream, that mirage in the desert. But like all illusions, it fades. And what's left? The man on his knees, wondering how he lost control. But Plato tells us, you never had control, not until you discipline your soul. The noble horse, the part of you that seeks truth, must be strengthened, not by hating the wild horse, but by understanding its nature. You cannot kill desire, but you can learn to ride above it. Only then does the charioteer become a master. Plato, in his work, Symposium, described love not as joy, but as a kind of divine madness. A force sent by the gods, yes, but one that blinds more than it blesses, one that enslaves the man who cannot see beyond appearances. This madness, Plato said, is not evil in itself, but it becomes destructive when the soul is weak, when the man forgets to ask, what am I truly worshipping? And here lies the tragedy of modern men. They do not fall in love with who she is. They fall in love with what she represents: salvation, fulfillment, status, escape. They mistake emotional dependency for intimacy and the shadow of affection for real connection. It is the oldest form of idolatry. Not worshiping a god, but worshiping a woman as if she were one. Plato would call this spiritual confusion. A man sees a body and thinks he's found meaning. He hears kind words and believes he's found truth. But all he's done is project his hunger onto another person. And when she withdraws, when she shows her flaws, when she walks away, his delusion shatters, and he suffers. Not because she was cruel, but because he built a temple on unstable ground. This is why Plato urged men to seek the form of beauty, the eternal truth behind appearances, not the flickering image in front of them. Because the moment you confuse the shadow for the source, the illusion for the essence, you are no longer a man in love. You are a man in chains. Most men never reach this level of clarity. They remain dreamers, spellbound by smiles, intoxicated by touch, and imprisoned by stories they wrote themselves. And yet Plato offers an escape, the life of philosophy, of self-mastery, of truth above desire. Not to deny love, but to see it clearly, to see her clearly, not as a savior, not as a prize, but as a mirror. Only then can you love without losing yourself. Plato feared one thing more than war, more than poverty, more than death, the corruption of the soul, and he warned that the first step toward that corruption is often the smallest. A glance, a laugh, a touch. You think these moments are harmless? You think you're in control. But the truth is, you're already negotiating with your own values. Every time you bend a boundary to keep her interested, every time you silence your truth to avoid conflict, every time you mold yourself into what she wants, you are trading your soul for comfort. Plato made it clear, the man who cannot rule himself will be ruled by others, by flatterers, by tyrants. And what is flattery if not the illusion of affection, carefully wrapped to make you obedient? You don't need chains when you crave approval. You don't need force when a smile controls you. That's why the woman doesn't have to manipulate you consciously. You'll do it all yourself, for a chance at her validation. And here's the brutal irony. The more you try to win her, the more you lose yourself. The more you chase her approval, the more you betray your purpose. The more you try to please her emotions, the more disconnected you become from your mission. This is not love. This is self-abandonment. And Plato would call it what it is, injustice. Not against her, not against society, but against your own soul. Because when you allow appetite to dominate reason, when you place a woman above truth, you fracture the very structure that keeps a man whole. And the collapse, once it begins, does not stop at emotion. It seeps into every part of your life. Your work, your discipline, your clarity. You become a man led by winds instead of a man guided by principle. The fall is subtle, but the damage is total. Plato warned us not just of the woman, but of the war within the man. A war most men never acknowledge, because it doesn't look like war. It looks like romance. It sounds like love. It feels like destiny. But beneath the surface, it is the ancient struggle between purpose and pleasure, between your higher calling and your lower craving, between the part of you that seeks truth and the part of you that just wants to be held. You think the battle is between you and her, but that's the illusion. The real enemy is not the woman. It's the weakness in you that's willing to abandon your mission for her touch. Plato's philosophy demands one question above all. What rules you? Because if it's not reason, if it's not your purpose, your values, your clarity, then it will be appetite. And appetite, when worshipped, destroys men faster than war ever could. Look around. Men have lost empires for a kiss, betrayed families for a fling, destroyed careers for a woman who didn't respect them. Not because women are evil, but because these men had no command over their own souls. They mistook lust for love, obsession for purpose, validation for truth. And once you start feeding desire instead of guiding it, you become its slave. Every decision becomes reactive. Every emotion becomes urgent. Every silence from her becomes a crisis. Plato wrote that the man who allows the appetitive part of his soul to rule becomes not just weak, he becomes less than a man. He becomes an animal dressed in human words, a servant to sensation. So ask yourself, which part of you is steering the chariot? Because if you're not driven by your mission, you will be dragged by your craving. Plato didn't just analyze individuals. He warned about entire civilizations. He saw it in Athens. He saw it in the fall of noble cities. And if he were alive today, he would see it in you. He argued that when pleasure begins to rule over discipline, decline is inevitable, not just personal collapse, societal collapse, because when men stop mastering themselves, they stop building civilizations worth inheriting. What does society look like when men no longer govern their desires? Look around. Men are told to chase love at all costs, to make her the center of their world, to fight for her, die for her, exist for her. They are praised for sensitivity, for sacrifice, for submission, but only when it's done in the name of romantic devotion. And Plato would call this exactly what it is, a culture that flatters weakness and punishes strength. A man who prioritizes his mission, who says no to temptation, who walks away from emotional chaos, is seen as cold, arrogant, heartless. But in truth, he is free, because he does not worship shadows. Yet modern society worships shadows like idols, the fantasy of the perfect woman, the myth of the soulmate, the idea that your purpose is incomplete without her. Plato taught the opposite. He believed that the highest man, the Philosopher King, was not ruled by affection, nor admiration, nor impulse. He was ruled by reason, by truth, by a vision greater than himself. That man built cities. That man shaped the future. That man lasted. And the man who fails to rise to this, he doesn't just lose a woman, he loses himself and becomes one more name forgotten in the ruins of a weak society. There is a brutal truth Plato never wrote plainly, but it's embedded in all his philosophy. Women don't create your weakness, they expose it. She doesn't ruin you, she reveals you. When she tests your patience, she's exposing your need for control. When she withdraws affection, she's revealing your addiction to validation. When she challenges your values, she's uncovering how weak those values actually are. And you think the test is about her? It's about you. Plato believed the soul takes on the character of the actions it pursues. If you spend your life chasing shadows, attention, beauty, flattery, your soul becomes hollow. And worse, you become easy to manipulate, not because she is powerful, but because you never built inner strength. A woman doesn't need to be calculating to dominate you. She only needs to hold up a mirror and let your ego do the rest. This is why Plato didn't teach men to hate women. He taught them to face themselves, to understand that every external conflict is a reflection of an internal war. And if you're collapsing in her presence, if you're constantly needing reassurance, chasing her affection, fearing her absence, it is not because she is cruel. It is because you have not faced your own reflection. She tests you not out of malice, but because nature does. Fire tests metal, battle tests courage, and women, consciously or not, test the soul. She will push your boundaries to see if you have any. She will challenge your values to see if they're real. And every time you break, every time you fold, every time you betray yourself just to keep her, she loses respect. Because you've proven you cannot govern the kingdom of your own mind. The man who cannot rule himself, Plato warned, can rule nothing else. Not his home, not his fate, not his legacy. Plato's ultimate teaching was not about politics, not about philosophy and theory. It was about sovereignty, the absolute rule of a man over his own soul. And this, above all, is what most men have lost. You spend your days chasing her attention, thinking it will complete you. You adjust your values to fit her moods. You call that love. Plato would call it betrayal, not of her, but of yourself. Every time you bend to keep her close, every time you trade truth for peace, every time you silence your purpose for her approval, you chip away at the throne you were meant to rule from. You don't need to control her. You don't need to conquer her. You need to master yourself. That's the core of Plato's warning. The world will offer you illusions. Society will hand you myths. Desire will scream louder than reason. But only the man who chooses truth over temptation, mission over madness, clarity over comfort, only that man becomes free. Most men live in fear of losing a woman, but Plato says there is something far more terrifying, the loss of your soul. Because when you lose that, you lose everything. Your discipline, your vision, your power, your peace. The Philosopher King, Plato's highest image of man is not the one with the most women, the most wealth, or the loudest voice. It is the man who, no matter what chaos surrounds him, remains unmoved, clear, centered, true. He doesn't hate women. He doesn't worship them either. He sees them clearly, not as saviors, not as threats, but as mirrors. And in that reflection, he confronts his ego, his craving, his fear, and he overcomes. So here is the final truth. Stop chasing the shadow. Stop building temples in her eyes. Stop trading your mission for moments of affection. Rise, reclaim your mind. Face the mirror and rule the kingdom within you. Because once you do, you will never be played again. Not by her, not by the world, and not by yourself.